just another Saturday afternoon. Thank you for tuning in and joining me for the next hour through the world of critical thinking. Yes, right here on Mojo 50 Radio, I take you through numbers, facts, figures, faith, freedom, free markets, all sorts of wonderful goodness each and every week. And boy, oh boy, do we have a jam-packed show once again. There's a ton of news that is broken late in the week that we need to get to. But before I do anything else, please, folks, don't forget, you can follow me, your humble host, Andrew Coppins, at The Coppins Show on Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of the wonderful goodness of the social media world. And my last name can be spelled Coppens, Coppens. Now, of course, if you're listening live, then you figured out how to do that. But if you're listening via podcast and you want to catch this show on Saturday afternoon as it airs in its first format, you can do so iHeartRadio, Spreaker, or Mojo50.com. Or if you're into the visualization of this program, you can do that over at the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page. And folks, there was a brand new opener, a visual opener, to hopefully entice you into checking out this program that way. And of course, I encourage you, go over to YouTube, type in Critical Thinking with Andrew Coppins, or just type in Andrew Coppins and you will see the show pop up. Hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and you won't miss a single episode of this show. It won't be live, but it will be the replay of this show. And then most importantly, the segments from this show will get broken down so that you can digest it in a fewer bits and pieces, maybe pick out the ones that you're really interested in, but hit that subscribe button because, folks, in the coming weeks, we may have more and more content over at the YouTube page. So whatever shall we be talking about? Well, I want to say thank you to today's show sponsors, the letters CYA, as in cover your ass. It's apparently all the rage in Washington, D.C., and, not shockingly, they're propagandists in the media. We have got to talk about ABC's CYA moment regarding this whole Jeffrey Epstein story, as well as the socialist move to basically take on raising your children. Yes, we're going to be talking about Kamala Harris and her 10-hour educational marathon each and every Monday through Friday, and this whole idea. But there will also be not one but two guests again this week. Joining me in the first half of the show is going to be Chris Jacobs of the Juniper Research Group and author of the great book, The Case Against Single Payer. He's going to be here to talk about Elizabeth Warren's wonderful Medicare-for-All plan and all of the numbers, facts, and figures in that regard. And then in the second half of the show, fellow Mojo 50 radio host, yes, folks, if you're watching, yes, the gear is great. Yes, I've got the hooded sweatshirt on because, unfortunately, it's butt-ass cold here in the Midwest. But yeah, we will be joined by my brother from another mother, the wonderful Mojo 50 host of Battle4Freedom, Watson Prunier, and we're going to unpack evangelicals and their fervent support of Donald Trump. Is it real? Is it not? Trying to understand where they're coming from. I think it's going to be a very interesting conversation that you're going to want to stick around for. But we have got to talk about that whole ABC situation. Now, I think most of you by now have caught up on the ins and outs of what happened. Project Veritas on Tuesday released an insider video from ABC that was about ABC News anchor Amy Robach complaining on a hot mic about ABC basically spiking the Jeffrey Epstein story for 3 years. Count them, 3 years. We're talking Bill Clinton. We're talking Prince Andrew. All of the stuff that you heard be broken earlier this year, that was all readily available information to ABC for 3 freaking years. And Robach is pissed at the fact that they had all of the same information and never broke the story, never got it to air. I found it interesting that she's most pissed off about that and not the actions of one Jeffrey Epstein. So we're going to talk about that. But, of course, ABC had a response, and their response was to claim that it didn't pass their editorial standards. And here's what we're going to do, folks. Bullshit. Bullshit, bullshit, and more bullshit. There's 3 things that I want to highlight in the short time that we've got before Chris Jacobs joins us here in a little bit to talk about Elizabeth Warren. So, number one, this whole entire situation tells me that they don't have any moral standards. You, by the statement saying our editorial standards weren't met, tells me that you are more worried about covering your own ass than protecting the innocent potential victims in this entire story. And number two, bullshit on your editorial standards. You don't have editorial standards. You've got propaganda standards. Covington Catholic, Brett Kavanaugh, those stories, they were seek and destroy immediately. No background, no vetting, no checking done. But Harvey Weinstein, Woody Allen, Roman Polanski, in this case, oh, no, we couldn't possibly touch this even though we've heard rumblings and rumors and innuendo and actual facts for years. Suddenly, that's not good enough. Suddenly, we cannot be bothered. I want you to think about that dichotomy. Covington Catholic, Brett Kavanaugh, seek and destroy. Harvey Weinstein, Woody Allen, Roman Polanski, no, we have to protect them. Why? Because one set of people were on the right and the other set of the people espoused the leftist propaganda views of the news media. They are on the same side. And number three here, and this is the thing that broke later this week. ABC apparently made a call to CBS and got somebody fired. That person was Ashley Bianco, who happened to work at ABC for 3 years and then CBS for just the past few weeks. Turns out she wasn't the leaker at all. She talked to Megyn Kelly on Megyn Kelly's YouTube, making a return to interviewing in a fascinating interview. Check it out on the YouTube page for Megyn Kelly. Turns out she is not the person who leaked this story. They played politics from the get-go. They played access over truth. They played God in the end with somebody's career. Never mind the fact that Project Veritas told you this week that the person was still working for you. Project Veritas gave you that bit of information, and you chose somebody else to lay the blame on. Absolutely sickening. But from one sickening incident to sickening numbers. And I'm joined now by Chris Jacobs, Juniper Research Group, and guess what, folks? The purveyor, the wonderful author of this book that I am holding, The Case Against Single Payer. It is How Medicare-for-All Will Wreck America's Healthcare System and Its Economy. Chris Jacobs. Folks, if you are seeing this, you'll see all of the wonderful earmarks in this book because there's a ton of information in a really, really good read. It's Chris Jacobs HQ on Twitter. Thank you so much for joining us once again. I feel like it's becoming a monthly thing as of late.
Thanks very much for having me.
All right, so the reason we're having you on here is because, believe it or not, the miracles of all miracles have happened. The one, the only Elizabeth Warren has finally given us some details into how she wants to pay for this whole Medicare for All thing. And very clearly, we have got to talk about that. And I can't think of anybody else better than Chris Jacobs. So from the outside looking in, okay, for me, it seems like the number that jumps out is $9 trillion. It's the idea that she put forth that corporations are going to pay $9 trillion into this whole Medicare for All or single payer system, however you want to term it. But it's very clear to me that something is not adding up when you take a look at $9 trillion and then $52 trillion, which is the estimated cost of her Medicare for All plan. Can you enlighten me as to how this math works?
Well, I can explain it. I can
Are you saying that it doesn't work?
I can explain it. Let me put it to you that way. It's quite simple. The tax is going to come out of the middle class. And ironically enough, Warren's own campaign advisor, Donald Berwick, admitted as much a few days after Warren released her plan. He did an interview with Axios that was published this past Wednesday, where he said all healthcare spending ultimately comes from workers. That's exactly the charge that Joe Biden's campaign laid correctly, accurately, against Elizabeth Warren for saying this employer contribution is a tax increase that firms will pass through onto their workers. Some contribute to their health and to employees' health insurance plans already, but that's voluntary. There's a big difference between doing it voluntarily for some employees and making it mandatory for all employees.
Yeah, one of the things that I can't wrap my brain around is this idea that they're just going to switch that employer contribution to contributing into this system. I don't see how it's even close to being constitutional. You're forcing somebody that's, like you said, doing it voluntarily to now having to do it by decree of the federal government. I don't know how this would even pass muster with the court systems.
Well, over and above the constitutional issues, and trust me, there are lots of things in Elizabeth Warren's plan that are constitutionally questionable at best, it's very difficult to see how this is going to work. There's a line in her plan that specifically says additional anti-evasion rules will also be introduced. That's a very clear tell. That's a tell that they admit that employers will try to game this system, and they haven't figured out a good way to stop employers from gaming the system. The one obvious way is if you want to reduce your employer contribution, well, just drop health insurance right now, so that way you won't have an employer contribution to pay in the future. We're in the middle of the open enrollment season right now. I would be amused if a large employer decided to say, okay, we're going to drop coverage right now so that we won't have to pay Elizabeth Warren's employer contribution when that comes down the line in a couple of years from now. Those are the kind of perverse incentives you will have employers trying to game the system to reduce their payments in. Warren's own campaign admits they don't have all the solutions for that.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I think there's going to be a ton of gaming of the system because they're already putting loopholes into this. And what I also find interesting is that this is supposed to be single-payer healthcare, and it's supposed to be Medicare-for-All. But there's nothing single-payer about you as the taxpayer contributing and your employer contributing and other people contributing. So when I take a look at this, it just doesn't pass the muster of single-payer either. And then one of the things that I want to drive home here. Now, recently, an Emerson poll of Iowa voters actually found that healthcare was the number 2 thing on the mind of voters in that state. And it is about as purple of a state as you're going to find in the United States of America right now if you take a look at all the polling. The only thing that was above healthcare in the eyes of the Iowa voter was the economy. And we've talked about this in the past, is that it seems like people are stripping out the economic and healthcare as if they're not linked together. Could you talk about how the economy and Elizabeth Warren's healthcare plan are inextricably linked?
Well, they're linked except when she says they're not. There's a line, and I'm not making this up, there's a line in an appendix to Warren's healthcare plan that admits that their revenue projections do not take into account the economic growth impacts of the tax increases. In other words, if all of these tax increases shrink the economy, which they will, they won't produce the revenue that Warren says they will, and she will have a multi-trillion-dollar black hole in her plan. So again, Warren's trying to divorce healthcare from the economy. It's why her plan is completely unrealistic. I've outlined in my book, there's an entire chapter, as you well know, about the economic impacts of single payer and the economic impacts of all these tax increases and the economic impacts of abolishing the health insurance industry and putting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people out of work within the healthcare sector. So there will be huge economic impacts regarding any change to the economy. Healthcare is 15 going on 20% of the economy. There'll be huge changes, economic changes for the worse, sparked by Elizabeth Warren's plan.
Yeah, it's unbelievable when you take a look at the numbers and how she's divorcing reality from her perception of what she wants to do. And I think it's interesting when you look at the political side of all of this, there's nothing from the Republicans, right, other than this is unworkable, this is unworkable. I think it's interesting to see that, you know, when we looked at the 2016 election, there was a ton of talk about market-driven plans and market-driven ideas and all of these things that the Republicans wanted to do. Here we are going into 2020. None of it has come to fruition. So I have a two-part question for you. Where is the Republican plan as of today? We have a Republican president. I see no plan of his. Where is it? And if there isn't one, what should we, the conservative or libertarian part of the society here, do to combat what Warren and Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris and all of these people are doing? Because it seems like they're just being able to steamroll the society into believing that what they can do is workable.
Sure. I think there are proposals out there. The Republican Study Committee released a conservative alternative healthcare plan, alternative to Obamacare, a few weeks ago. That would certainly be a step in the right direction in terms of reforming the system. President Trump obviously didn't get a cooperative Congress in 2017, 2018, was limited by that, and obviously will not have a cooperative House of Representatives this year or next. They are trying to put in changes, reforms through the regulatory regime to try to deregulate some of the massive health insurance regulations included as part of Obamacare. There are obviously limits to that. The best idea is to change the law. I lay out in the last chapter of my book an alternative vision for healthcare. I think that involves reforming the markets. I think that involves putting out better solutions for pre-existing conditions, because the current regulations have literally priced millions of individuals out of health insurance. I think we need to make our safety net sustainable. The way to make it sustainable is prioritize resources for those most in need, not try to spend $30 to $50 trillion that we don't have on a more expanded government. So we need to make our safety net more sustainable, and we need to get the incentives right. One of the problems of healthcare, why it's such a big part of our economy, is because everybody does a great job of spending, but everybody else's money. And we need to try to get the incentives right. No, you're not going to do that when you're in the ambulance on the way to the hospital for a heart attack. You're not going to be able to shop around for care. Nobody expects that. But there are a lot of services that individuals can shop with and get more price and quality information out there. Transparency can make better consumers of healthcare, and more importantly, help drive the prices down that keep eating our economy alive.
Yeah, and I use the example of dental insurance right now. When I go to the dentist, right, I'm given the price of what I might be getting for the service before the service is given to me. And if I choose to want to go somewhere else, I can. Now, obviously, dental insurance is different because it doesn't really have the comprehensive package of coverage and all of the things that go with regular health insurance. But I use it as an example of being able to price shop, right? If the dentist down the street is $200, the guy across the street from him is $150. They provide basically the same service at the same quality. Why would you go to the guy that's $200? And you can do that with things like MRIs and some of the imaging stuff. You can do a lot of that in terms of price shopping today, and most consumers have no clue about that. But follow up to the original question here about, where's the Republican plan and all of those things. I think the ultimate question for me is, will the Republicans actually ever really do anything on this issue? I know that they've stripped away some of the Obamacare, the mandate and all of those things, but that doesn't seem to be enough. There has to be something that fundamentally transforms how our health insurance system, not necessarily health care, but the health insurance part of health care gets reformed. There's got to be something. Do you think Republicans have the stomach to have that fight?
They're going to have no choice. And I was in a meeting a week or so ago. Somebody said, well, they're not going to repeal Obamacare. It's here to stay, kind of very fatalistic about it. But when you look at the trends, healthcare is a large part of our federal budget and growing. It's not just Republicans that are going to have to address healthcare costs. Everybody's going to have to address healthcare costs because they're eating us alive. Medicare is already functionally insolvent. Only the double counting from Obamacare is keeping the Medicare trust fund afloat at this point. So it's really technically afloat only on paper. We're going to have to go back and address this because it's consuming more of our economy. It's consuming more of our federal resources. And so really at a certain point, Congress is going to have no choice. They're going to have to reform the system. They're going to have to make the safety net more sustainable for people because Herb Stein's old law says unsustainable trends are in the long run unsustainable. We don't know when that tipping point's going to be, but every day we get closer to it.
And before we let you go, obviously the show is all about critical thinking. It's about getting to the roots of the issue and solutions. So as we look at Elizabeth Warren's plan, we've heard a lot on the conservative side about how crazy the numbers are and all of those things. If you could pinpoint one thing that the listener can take and go into their discussions with, the people they live around and that crazy, socialist that's living down the street or whatever, when they go into those discussions, if you could take one thing and make that the focal point of the argument against Elizabeth Warren's plan, what is that one thing?
Sure, it's two kind of related points. Even if you, and I had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal about this issue earlier this week. Mm-hmm. Even if you take all our assumptions at face value, and most people don't, and they shouldn't, what Elizabeth Warren is saying is that everyone will have free health care for everyone, paid for by virtually no one, paid for by only the 1% or only the rich. Now, two important things to bear in mind with that. First of all, that's the problem we have now, is that everyone is spending everybody else's money in healthcare. So you're only exacerbating that problem. The second question is, think about it. The old saying, you get what you pay for. If Elizabeth Warren isn't even willing to ask the middle class to pay $10 or $100 for all this free healthcare, how good is her plan really going to be? What kind of healthcare quality do you think you're going to get if she won't even ask you to pay a dime for it?
Yeah, those are both very solid points going forward. So folks listening out there, folks watching on our Facebook page at Mojo50 Radio on Facebook, make sure you guys take these points and really hammer them home. Make other people think about their point of view and defend it. And that's what these types of things are for. Now, again, I cannot recommend this book more. It is The Case Against Single Payer. Chris Jacobs, the author. Chris, why don't you let people know what you've got coming down the pipeline for yourself and where people can follow your work?
Sure. You can follow me at Chris Jacobs HC on Twitter. I write for the Federalist. You can check me out there several times a week. My book is available on Amazon, wherever bookstores, your favorite bookstore. And stay tuned to me on Twitter and Facebook for updates and upcoming ventures.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us once again, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about as the 2020 field narrows itself down. Once again, thank you to Chris Jacobs for joining us here on the show. On that note, let's head into break here on Mojo50 Radio. On the flip side, Kamala Harris says she's got the answer for parents and kids. Something about a 10-hour school day. Boy, oh boy, is it going to be a lot of fun right here on Mojo50 Radio. Welcome back into Critical Thinking right here on Mojo 50 Radio. I'm your host with the most numbers, Andrew Coppins, of course. Follow me on your social medias at The Coppins Show, freedomhard.com, Facebook, Twitter, Parlay, all of those sites. Whatever your fancy is, give me a follow so you don't miss anything. And of course, if you're listening to the show live or via podcast, what are you doing? You can see this whole thing live. Head over to the Mojo 50 Radio Facebook page for the live version of the show. If you can't catch it live, you can always hit up the YouTube channel for me, myself, and I. Just search Andrew Coppins, Coppens. Coppens is the last name. So whatever shall we be talking about in this second half of the show? Well, of course, we've got our upcoming interview with Watson Prunier. Before he joins us, though, that's right, the Watson Prunier from Battle4Freedom, right here on Mojo 50 Radio. But before we get to talking about evangelicals and Donald Trump, we've got to be talking about the evangelical side of leftism. That means statism. But the government will take over for your child care. Yes, that's right. Childcare. And how is she going to go about this? Well, you see, your child's just going to have to go to school for 10 hours. That's right. 10-hour school days. She's going to spend $1 billion, by the way, on summer learning programs as well. And the pilot program is going to see some 500 schools for a 5-year period with results-driven analysis being done at the end. Each school will earn up to $5 million for doing this over the 5-year period, and they're going to have to keep their doors open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. 8 to 6. Holy crap. And Mother Jones went into further detail on this program, saying that a pilot program that gives money to 500 schools that serve a high proportion of low-income families to develop a school schedule that better matches the work schedule. Each recipient school would receive up to $5 million over 5 years, like I said before, to keep their doors open from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. with no closures except for weekends, federal holidays, and emergencies. Professional development, parent-teacher conferences, and the like would have to happen at minimum alongside a full day of enrichment activities. At the end of the 5 years, the Education Department would publish a report documenting the best practices as well as changes in parental employment, student performance, and teacher retention rates to be used to inform a future broader program. Schools are encouraged to use the funding to collaborate with community partners to develop, quote, high-quality, culturally relevant, linguistically accessible, developmentally appropriate academic, athletic, or enrichment opportunities for students. The directive is purposefully vague. Schools are to spend the first year surveying parents, teachers, and community members to determine what sort of extended school day would work best for their particular school population. So naturally, the American Federation of Teachers was on board, and yada, yada, yada. And by the way, folks, this is not some fly-by-night idea. Did you notice she said the word bill? That is an actual bill being proposed in the Senate, and she's got, of course, well, Bernie Sanders and the support of multiple senators within the Democratic caucus on that side of the aisle. Now, remember back, by the way, to our little discussion about Bernie Sanders and this whole free college plan. I warned you that during that whole idea, this idea that it was going to be federally funded would come with strings, and one of those strings would be, eventually down the road, not just on the college level. They would come to your K through 12 levels. This is how this happens, folks. If this bill were to pass, it's not just about extending the school day. It's not just about what's best for the parents, irregardless of the fact that any academic, any psychological study shows more time with the parents, less time with other people is a good thing for the development of the child. Never mind all of that. But it's the state. For the left, the state knows better than you or I or anybody else would in regards to their children. It's all about controlling and indoctrinating your kids. So make no mistake about it, folks. Homeschooling will also be outlawed. That is another prediction that I have. When I look at this from a critical thinking perspective, right? That's what we're supposed to be doing here, okay? Top down is what's going to happen. Bernie Sanders wants free college. The only way to get there is to attach strings to this federal money that would be coming to the states and to the public-run colleges. Okay? When you take a look at that, that is what would happen. Some of those strings initially are just tied to the college level, but I guarantee you it trickles right down to the K through 12. And this would be a part and parcel of it, because they would have an ability to not just teach you math and science and history and all of those types of things. They now would have extra hours to teach cultural enrichment, to teach all of these extra things. Don't you think that maybe part of this will be teaching your child about the fears of climate change? Indoctrinating your students and your children into believing what the state wants them to believe. Not what you as a parent would like them to believe, not what you would like to teach them. So homeschooling would go bye-bye, because you can't have that in the statist situation in their school control. K through 12 would have federally mandated standards as well, and those standards will undoubtedly include all sorts of wackiness. So what I'm trying to tell you here, folks, get your children the hell out of the state education system now. Homeschool them if you have to for right now, or put them into a private school. I know that not everybody can do that, but find the means to do so. Take your children out of this potential indoctrination scenario. Take them out. If this whole idea of basically they're taking on rearing your child for 10 hours, Monday through Friday, 50 hours a week, 50 hours that you don't get to see your child or interact with your child. If you don't see the slippery slope here, if this doesn't set off all sorts of alarm bells for you, I don't know what will. But speaking of alarm bells, let's talk with Watson Prunier. And the reason I'm having him on is, well, Watson, me being a Catholic, this whole evangelical Christian thing, I quite don't understand it and get it. So if I'm talking about evangelical support of one Donald Trump, I think I need to bring somebody on that has a little more inkling into the matter. So welcome into this here little sprinkle of Mojo 50 Radio.
Hey, thank you very much. I really appreciate it, Father Andrew.
Domini Patris. No. Oh, you want me to go full Latin on you? Because I could. No.
Go for it.
No. But I think it's interesting as we get into the 2020 election season, and as we talk about the impeachment and the impending impeachment inquiry and vote that we all know that's coming, we've seen evangelical support of Donald Trump only continue to really be his strongest base. And I find it fascinating because to me, it seems like an absolute dichotomy of, on the one hand, Donald Trump not being exactly the bastion of moral goodness and continues to be somebody that you really wouldn't want to put on not even a pedestal, but even on a mantle or even a step stool for people to really look for as a leader or as a as somebody that could be a, what's the word I'm looking for now, drawing a blank, but a role model, if you will. Not somebody that an evangelical would necessarily lift up, per se, at least in my book. So I'm going to ask you right off the bat, how does Donald Trump play with this crowd, and where does this type of support really come from, if you could put your finger on it at all?
Well, one of the things that I know that a lot of people probably hope for in this country for the longest time is a pullback to Christian values. Believing that the country is based on, was founded on Christian principles. Unfortunately, a lot of Christians have taken their eyes off of the true focus of who's truly in control, and believing that by putting an obstinate man like Donald Trump in office is going to yield the results that they were hoping for. Honestly, to tell you the truth, I equate it a lot to the early zealots just before Jesus arose. came onto the scene. The Zealots basically wanted to build up this army of people who were going to fight against the oppressive Romans, and a lot of Christians, they're looking for any hope that's going to fight against the oppressive social regime that has been trying to take control of this country. So unfortunately, Donald Trump is just a means to an end, and a lot of them have actually abandoned their principles to truly embrace a person. Now, again, he has his shortcomings, just like every last one of us. But I'm tired of people using the examples of him using a Nebuchadnezzar, him using a Darius, him using all these non-Christian folks to accomplish his will, and he only perpetuates our desire to yield to our base behavior. And while I appreciate the successes that he's accomplished, I cry in the compromising that has been made to allow Christians to be a voice behind him. We should pray for him, definitely. The Bible tells us to do that. But the excuses made for his petulant behavior, it's unacceptable, and it's really unflattering and unbecoming.
Yeah, and that's the hard part, right? For people who are Christian and kind of see through the we need to support him because it's a means to an end. You can have a means to an end, but also have somebody who actually lives out most of the values that they espouse, right? Donald Trump placates a ton to the Christian right, and it's become his most ardent supporters, and I don't understand it. I don't think anybody can say with a straight face that they're doing it because he is the face of their values, right?
I honestly, to tell you the truth, what it is people are ascribing a prophetic aura around Donald Trump. A lot of Christians, for some strange reason, are thinking like they treat the United States as the new Israel. And they look at Donald Trump as this vision, this leader that's going to carry us into the end times. We want a strong, valiant leader. Support Israel. No, I have no problem with supporting Israel. I am pro-Israel. However, I think people are not truly, like you said, following someone who supports their ideals. And in that compromise, how does a Christian with a straight face continue to make excuses for the bombastic behavior, for the the biggest thing he could do to truly silence his critics, and they the same, vice versa, don't respond. You're not obligated to respond to the people who want to come out and attack you, but he can't stop. And I think maybe his behavior gives other people license to act in the same manner because they feel, well, if the president can get away with it and God's not done anything, maybe I can. I don't know if that's the reason why, but I think a lot of people are seeing him in this prophetic role of a future and a vision of America and the rest of eternity that I just don't think lines up with the Bible.
And I'm glad that I'm not the only one that sees kind of the, not necessarily hypocrisy, but maybe they're looking at it as I'm done with trying to fight the good fight. Let somebody else fight the dirty fight for us, right? And maybe that's part of the equation here, but be honest about it. Don't say that this is a good Christian man, that this is a good individual. Look, Donald Trump has some good policies. Donald Trump has done some really good things, in my view, for America, right? But that doesn't mean that I have to support the immorality, the bombastic nature, the me first culture that he represents in and of himself. It'd be different if there was some humbleness, if there was some humility involved in this. And there's nothing humble or about Donald Trump, and there's never has been.
And you know what the problem is? I think that truth is just so blinded or prevented from people recognizing that they just see him in this one particular way, and they can't see him any different. It's a desire, and it's this desperation to win at all costs. So we I don't know. I don't know if we're just constructing this weird illusion in our minds, and I don't get it. You know what? I want to get back to what you were saying earlier about the whole idea of winning at all costs, the Linsky rule, the chaos principle. The
Yep.
Democrats and the left have gotten away with it for so long, Andrew, and I watched this over the last several years. Republicans, conservatives, people in the right are getting drunk with the power of confusion and chaos, and there is no better king of chaos than Donald Trump.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, Donald Trump is the king of chaos. You take a look at how he's able to, take the focus off of whether it's the impeachment inquiry or the biggest news of the day with something equally as insane or equally good, right? I mean, we're talking about on the heels of this impeachment inquiry and all the things that were going on with that. Suddenly we get al-Baghdadi, and that's a really good win for the United States of America, but it also has a win for Donald Trump. And this goes back to kind of the entire impeachment argument. Is this a case of Christians or evangelical Christians, I think more importantly, seeing Donald Trump as a person who can get their will done but do it in a way that they would never be able to do on their own? Is it
correct?
It's not just
Correct.
a means to an end. It's a person. It's a vehicle or a vessel, if you will, to try to get their politics through in a way that doesn't get any blood on their hands. Maybe.
Bingo. That is it right there. No blood on their hands. Let someone else do the dirty work. I'm going to elect this person to do the dirty work, and guess what? I'm just abiding by what my president's done. He's the one who did it. It wasn't me. No, you voted him in. This is what you wanted.
Right.
So you have to accept the consequences. It makes me think of the children of Israel. How they wanted to be like everybody else. They had to have a king. They already had God as their king, but you know what? God gave them Saul. He gave them the desires of their hearts and everything, all the baggage that came with that. And you know what? They had to accept the baggage that came with Saul as king. Well, you know what? It's the same exact thing for not only Republicans and for the people who voted for Trump, but I'm even saying even the people who voted for Barack Obama, as they wanted him as their Saul and king, who's going to be like everybody else. Well, accept him and the baggage that came with it, and don't sit here and close your eyes to what you fostered and you basically sanctioned in you pulling the lever for him.
And one of the interesting arguments on the other side of this is that, we're supposed to love the sinner, not the sin, right? And that's definitely a tenet of Catholicism, right? Is that we're taught that sinners are to be protected and that we're supposed to love the sinner so that sinner can repent. So my question would be, is that really an applicable defense for the unwavering support of Donald Trump? There's a difference, in my view, of supporting specific policies and specific things that Donald Trump is advocating for, because that makes some sense. But there's a difference between that and just wholeheartedly putting all of your eggs into the basket. I don't buy the defense with Donald Trump because I see no repentance. I see no remorse. I see nothing from him that indicates that he's willing to look internally and say, I give my life to Christ. I give my life to the church, and I repent in the things that I have done in the past.
I remember during the campaigning process, during the primaries, and then even to the election process, tons and tons of Christians are telling me, now these are these pro-Trump people that the pro-Trump people who went so far as to see him as Messiah, as the Hope and Change people saw Barack Obama as this political and economic Messiah. And many said to me, "Oh, he's saved, he's a Christian." And I was like, "Okay, okay, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt, but I'm sorry, there are just certain things that just change. When you're a newfound Christian, there's this behavior. Kanye is showing better behavior of a converted Christian in a month than Donald Trump has done in 3 years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's an interesting path to follow when you're talking about Kanye versus Trump in terms of their Christianity. And who am I to say that what's right and wrong in terms of how you practice your Christianity? But I think when you're talking about your faith and how that plays out in society, I think you have to at least be able to admit your own failings, and you have to at least be able to admit that there are guideposts that if you are failing at those guideposts, as long as you admit that, as long as you take the step back, as long as you correct those actions, we're fine. But we're not seeing that from either the supporters of him. Lord knows we just had a Christian comedian come out and basically have to admit to sexual harassment and at the very minimum, and could be potential sexual assault. We've seen, how many of these mega church pastors come out and have to repent for major sins. I just find it interesting that we still, no matter what you put in front of an evangelical, in my viewpoint, in the talks that I've had, no matter what you put in front of them as to the immorality of Donald Trump and some of the things that he's done, it doesn't matter to them. Do you see that changing as we get closer to 2020? Or do you think that this impeachment inquiry is kind of the thing that's solidifying the support in that evangelical base?
You know what? I think you have to understand, you're right. If I'm a Christian, there's going to be some evidence that something is happening. And I don't know if it's the behavior of Donald Trump and the petulant behavior that maybe makes other people feel comfortable in their sin. So it's like, well, who am I to judge? Who am I to judge? Well, guess what? The Holy Spirit is here to judge. The Holy Spirit and other Christians are asking us to take a deeper look inside. We're sitting here, Andrew, and we are going out of our way to condemn the Democratic Party. We recite, they booed God 3 times. They're the party of abortion. And somehow, some way, we have hierarchically ascribed abortion, gay marriage, all these different things that the Democrats are for as some greater sin than the behavior of what Donald Trump is doing and what we are doing. And it's wrong. We're deflecting rather than going to the true introspection and realize I want to win, but I can't lose my soul and conscience in the process. And I think that it's going to get worse before 2020. There's nothing he can do wrong. I remember when he said, I can shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and they'll still love me. They still support me. And I'm thinking, like, that's very troublesome because that never should have come out of your mouth in the first place.
Right. Like, who thinks that, right?
Right. Think all these excuses.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with you in terms of that was a defining moment for me in terms of knowing that he thinks that of himself. Like, I've never once thought, I could bet you I could go down the street and have no consequences or whatever.
Exactly.
Because here's the deal, right? I know that the ultimate consequence is my Lord and Maker. He knows. He knows. And if I'm not willing to repent here on earth, it don't really matter to me. So it's going to be interesting. I just find this whole topic of I find this whole thing interesting. If you've ever seen an interview with an evangelical, how quick they are to just go into pure defense mode when it comes to anybody questioning why they would support Donald Trump, and at the same time have the gumption, if you will, to talk about the morality of anybody else.
Exactly. I mean, we sit here talking about the hypocrisy of Democrats and liberals and progressives. I'm like, hey, folks, look in the mirror.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're all hypocrites, right? We're all people that say and do the opposite. We all do that to some extent in our lives, but there's a difference between being somebody who is evangelical about their beliefs and being a hypocrite. I find that really hard to... It'd be like me, in this program, battling socialism and then advocating for single-payer healthcare on the side.
Yeah, really.
So, but Watson, we're just a couple of days away here from you going live on Monday morning. Can you preview the show for Monday morning and tell people what the wonderful Battle for Freedom is all about each and every weekday morning here on Mojo 50 Radio.
Well, Battle for Freedom is a privilege for me to be on the air, communicate with people about like what we're talking about now, faith-based things. Let's look at things and let's look at issues that are going on and start asking people to ask the right questions. Okay, go ahead. You're fine to have your view. I'm not going to condemn you, but I want you to reflect on if there's going to be hypocrisy, we need to expose our own hypocrisy if we're going to be wanting to expose the hypocrisy of the left. We have to have the same gauge of discernment and indignation against ourselves as we have against our perceivable enemies. And the moment that we get away and we escape those ideologies or means of thinking that keeps us in bondage, the moment we find freedom. So, getting your finances in order, living on a budget, so that you can be free to enjoy the privileges of being born in this country.
Yeah, and there's no doubt it is a privilege to be born an American. There's no question about that. That it affords opportunities that few in this world would ever have. But on that note, real quick, Watson, how can people follow you, follow the show, and what do you got coming up on Monday?
Monday, I think, is just going to basically continue. I was talking about some things this morning about just the faith aspects and some behavior patterns that people might get hooked up on. I mean, the very thing of what we're talking about today of what's acceptable behavior, what's not, and maybe we should just focus more on how we need to be improved and living before God before we're going to be sitting here and casting other people into hell. We've got to do a better job at this because I think the world needs vision, the world needs leadership, and I'm hoping that I can inspire us to do a better job at doing that. Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. on Battle for Freedom. People can go to facebook.com /Battle for Freedom, leave comments there, or even leave me comments on Twitter, twitter.com /Battle for Freedom, as well as twitter.com /Battle for Freedom, or Watson Prunier.
And so, Watson, I got to say before we go, are you just saying the world just needs love, sweet love?
Something like that.
I had to, man.
With a little less time.
All right. Well, we're going to let you go. Enjoy the rest of your weekend with your family. And folks, that does it for our time together this week. Thank you to Watson Prunier for joining us. Thank you to Chris Jacobs for his talk through the entire Elizabeth Warren Medicare-for-All debacle. I hope you really enjoy our guests. I hope you follow them on social media and engage with our guests. They do a great thing by coming on during their weekends, taking some time out of their busy weekend schedules to join us. And on that note, I say thank you to each and every one of you for doing the same thing. So, until next week, keep being smart, keep being safe, and keep on being the amazing people you are.